Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today, a real pleasure to be joined by David Bickford. David, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you maybe to introduce yourself, because you have a background that maybe people don't come across very often, which I think will be intriguing. So tell us a little bit about the 2-3 worlds that you're coming from today.
Thank you very much, Simon. Very good to meet you, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, I was the legal director of MI5 and MI6 for a number of years, and I left that a few years ago, and then actually went to advise offshore governments around the world on countering money laundering, terrorist money laundering, criminal money laundering. And then I got into the world of CATIA, writing books. So I've had quite a varied career to date.
Very good. And look, we've got to talk about MI5 and MI6 because just the name MI5 and MI6, they're known globally, obviously, and we're here on the global discussion. And I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but for our audience, for people watching us or listening to this episode today, how does somebody even get into that line of work? You know, to work for MI5, to work for MI6, that's something not many people get to do in their lifetime. How did you end up in that world,
Yeah.
David?
Well, start with today. People can go online now and make an application. And we could talk later about what qualities of MI5 and 6 are looking for that. But my career path was very different. I was a lawyer in private practice, and I looked ahead. I saw the partner, the senior partner, the consultant, and we just buried one partner who'd gone on. So I said to myself, well, I'm not really sure I want to do this. And a few days later, my wife came and she showed me an advertisement for the legal advisor to the Turks and Caicos Islands government, which is a Caribbean country just below the Bahamas chain. And we both thought that would be really good fun. So we went out there, and it was very lucky because at that time, Turks and Caicos were developing a tourism industry and also a financial services industry. So I spent 2 years with the ministers there who were very, very able and very clever, working out how they could create this new nation for themselves. Then the Foreign Office asked me if I'd join them as a legal advisor. And I went there and I was put into defense work, a lot of human rights work, and also space law was just starting. So I was put onto that as being a new boy, which was really, really interesting. I look at the space station now and remember that that was one of the agreements that I helped draft. Then I went to Berlin for 3 years as the legal advisor of the British military government, which was a Foreign Office post. That was dealing with the Russians in Berlin, which was then still an occupied city. Extraordinary, really interesting. And getting to know the Russians was fascinating. Then I came back, did a lot of defense work, and also worked with the Americans on countering narcotics trafficking and money laundering coming through the Caribbean. MI5 and MI6 were going through a transition at that stage, moving from the beginnings of the end of communism to the major problems created by terrorism and international terrorism. And I was asked by them if I'd come and join their legal department as their legal director. So my track to MI5 and 6 was not a usual one.
That's an incredible story, and I love the fact that right at the top you said, "Well, we thought it would be great fun." That's an interesting viewpoint to start from. And as you say today, maybe the recruitment process is slightly different, and maybe we'll touch on that later on, as you say. But now let's talk a little bit about Katya, because you kind of mentioned it there as well, and we've kind of got this, this sort of spy chief turned author story as well to explore. And obviously from MI5 and MI6 and all your background and your experience there, And whether it's in terrorism, espionage, you mentioned organized crime, for example, which is still a huge problem today internationally and at home. So how did you get into the authoring work? Was it just, look, I've got this rich understanding of how this world connects together? And tell us about Katya. Let's get into it, David.
Yeah, sure. Uh, well, I was still doing work with overseas governments, advising on countering money laundering. And my granddaughter, who was 12 at the time, asked me if I'd go down to her school and talk to her year about being a spy. I thought that's good. We'll go down and tell them what the real world is. And I was talking about the women in MI5 and 6 who are extraordinary, and we can come to that later as well. And I suddenly realized that here was the world of Katya. And at that particular point, I created Katya, who actually is a Russian intelligence agent who works for an international intelligence agency with Americans, French, British, and Russians. And so Katya was born, which was interesting. Katya is very headstrong, determined, obviously courageous, and has that Russian ability to keep going, whatever the difficulties. Russians do keep going. They have that fantastic quality of never giving up. So here was Katya, and the first Katya book involved her chasing a money launderer who'd stolen Gaddafi's personal fortune of $500 million when he was killed, when he was president of Libya and killed. And she chases across the desert dealing with terrorists, goes to Ambergris Key, which is a very, very corrupt offshore tax haven, chasing this money. Well, terrorists and money launderers can actually be extremely dangerous, and they create enormous problems for her, which she manages to deal with in various ways. Exciting, relentless, according to people who've read it. And that was Katya. Then we thought, well, we took Katya as a chief of operations for that story. We thought, well, it might be a good idea to go back and see what Katya did in her very first operation. Now that was enormous fun because Katya goes off to deal with a Russian mafia who is money laundering cash to China to deal in the property market, but at the same time, they are trafficking women back to Russia from China. And Katya has to go in and deal with that. She's sent in as a high rolling gambler. And Katya at that stage is very raw, very new. And what we do is to watch her make mistake after mistake and see how she manages to clamber out and survive in this incredibly dangerous world. So those are the two stories that have been written and are both published. Very good fun. Hope people who read them have as much fun as we did writing them. I say we because I write with my wife, Carrie.
Well, that's excellent. And look, I know people, when they look at your work and the characters that you create and the world that you bring people into, you have a quality, obviously, that's second to none. People talk about the way that it's written, this world of espionage, this counter espionage, this sort of world of complexity that you bring to life for people. And whether it's the Sunday Times or indeed others, very highly reviewed and recommended work. So congratulations on the side of your career, which is this wonderful world that you allow people to share in. So congratulations on all the accolades and the books, of course, because the latest book is kind of doing the press circuit as well, isn't it? The Informer. So
Former, yes, it
yeah,
is. Yes. So thank you very much for that. That's very kind of you. And as I say, it's great fun to write. We have great fun writing it. We hope
very
everybody
good.
enjoys it.
Well, let's talk about this world of espionage a little bit, because you mentioned earlier, and we said we'd come back to it for our listeners, that today you can just go to a website and apply to be part of the agency, right? And the type of people that they're looking for. And then when you were sharing the story of going to the grandchild school and talking to them about females and women in the intelligence services, do you maybe want to expand on those two areas a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. The the qualities that the agencies look for when they're recruiting, the very top quality is integrity, funnily enough. Now, everybody knows that intelligence agents have to go out into the world and they have to tell stories about themselves in order to cover exactly who they are. They're manipulating and also they're courageous and they're determined. But the very top quality that the agencies look for is integrity. And integrity is important because if agents go out into the field and carry out work there, whether they're recruiting an agent or an informant, whether they're climbing into a building in the middle of the night to plant an eavesdropping device, whether they're listening into telephone conversations, they must be extremely honest about what they do for a number of reasons. The very first reason, of course, is when they come back to report. If in fact they make things up to try and make themselves look good, for instance, that means that the intelligence they're producing is unreliable. And as soon as that happens, the whole operation can go off piste. And that creates enormous problems. So integrity is vital. The other thing, of course, is determination. And the other ability is, of course, analytics, just being able to analyze situations and look at them dispassionately and come to conclusions. Coming back to women, women have a brilliant ability to think about 9 or 10 things at once and bring those threads together into a single conclusion. It's something that I have found that men don't necessarily possess. I think on the whole, we tend to be more straight line logical thinking um, in a different sort of way. So that when men and women in the agencies are working together in the team, it makes a very, very strong analytical ability and also a very strong ability to relate to people and gather the information that's needed.
Thank you. Great to hear. And it kind of reminded me when you were talking, because you have mentioned in previous conversations that when you originally joined the agency, um, there was this situation where some things are just, you know, to use the pun, that top secret, the super secrecy of certain things. So even though you got that intelligence and maybe it was reliable, but you then find yourself in a position where you can't actually use it for prosecution. Is that the case, David?
Yes, that's absolutely the case. And when I first joined the agencies, there were no prosecutions of terrorists because of that particular problem. The information or intelligence, if you like, was so secret it couldn't be used. That was a terrific waste because there was mounds of information that could actually be used in court to prosecute terrorists. And I was very lucky because I did a lot of work with the Americans and I understood how the Americans managed to deal with that problem. And the officers in the agencies were very prepared to open up and come to court and give evidence. And frankly, I thought that was extraordinarily good of them, having lived their lives in a total secrecy world. So we created, between us all, procedures where we could get the information to court and have that information put before a jury in open court. Before that happened, the lawyers worked very, very closely with the operational officers right from the very beginning of an operation to sift how the information that was being gathered could still be kept secret if it needed to be kept secret, but also be used at a trial if it was going to be useful. So when we went to trial, we opened the books. The judge at the trial would would see all the information we had, both secret and the stuff we wanted to use, to make absolutely sure that there was nothing that we were holding back that might be useful for the defense, because it's essential that the defense get all the information that might be useful to them to defend themselves, terrorists as well as anyone else. Sorry, that's a long answer. But as you can imagine, highly complicated, relying entirely on the officers and themselves, who are absolutely brilliant at working out how to be able to bring this information to court. It was very exciting, very satisfying.
And when it comes to the type of world, this sort of murky world, if I can use that term, that you've been in, experiencing and working with your colleagues around the world, you hold a certain reverence, don't you, for these intelligence officers, maybe from a bravery perspective, their dedication, the sacrifices that they make, because it's not an easy career either, is it?
No, it isn't. The agents are courageous, obviously. I mean, they're working in situations that can be extremely dangerous, and they are determined as well. They are also balanced, and at all times they're operating within the legislative framework of the agencies, and that means that anything they do has to be necessary, and also whatever they do has to be proportional. Now that means obviously necessary is quite obvious. Proportional is very difficult. That means that you're looking at the balance of rights between the people who are being targeted and the state who the agencies work for. So human rights come into it all the time. The European Convention on Human Rights, for instance, is absolutely essential for the agencies to guide them as to how the individuals they're looking at are protected. And that includes terrorists. Terrorists have rights. Terrorists have the right to life. Terrorists have the right to a family life. All those sort of rights. They must not be unnecessarily infringed. In other words, the balance must lie in favor of the state if the terrorist rights are going to be infringed. So while the agents are doing their work, they have to bear this sort of thing in mind. And that's where they work very closely with the lawyers, and how these operations are planned so very, very carefully, not only so that they succeed, obviously, but also so that they don't infringe the rights of the individuals they're investigating.
Excellent points. Thank you for sharing that insight, David. It brings me on to something that I want to ask you, which is, the world today as you see it, because from your vantage point, which is a lot more in depth and you understand this world better than most. Today's world's very complex. We've got cyber terrorism, we've got artificial intelligence, we've got global tensions, we've got wars and everything going on in between. Some of the threats today must be, are they different? Are they completely different to when you maybe started in the agency back in MI5 and MI6 days, or is it the same sort of problems just with different assets and elements? Is it the same threat that we face today that we've always faced? What's your view?
Same sort of threat, but they're far more complex. As you mentioned, there's artificial intelligence, there's fake news. This is going to be extremely difficult to deal with. Just on one aspect, for instance, one of the problems that I used to face when I was dealing with the agencies were people who were fantasists who pretended they were MI5 or MI6 officers and created problems. One had to investigate that to make quite sure that what they were fantasizing was fantasy and not in fact. That took time and it took money. So they created problems in the sense that work that was really vital was actually being halted because we had to go and investigate these people. Fake news, in my view, is going to be much more difficult because whilst the agencies can deal with that to a large extent, because they have a background of information to be able to deal with, the public are going to be misled, and the public are quite normally going to be seriously. It's not going to be any fault of theirs that they are. Fake news is quite real when you look at it. So the agency is going to have to deal with that, which is going to take more time, more money. Very difficult. The use of AI with the agencies, obviously they're going to be extremely fortunate in using that, because that will certainly help them in terms of sifting information more quickly, in terms of sifting the telephone intercepts that they're going through, and also working out what's really important in eavesdropping. I think also it will be applied to using information in court, because the ability to sift what is not assisting the defense, for instance, from the stuff that could be actual evidence that could be used by the agencies, will be made easier by AI. So,
yeah, thank you for sharing that, David. So let's talk a little bit now about your routine and your plans, because I know that yourself and Carrie, who helps you write the books, you take your morning walk, you discuss character plots, I believe, if that's still the case. And I want to ask you a little bit about how the process works between the two of you, and also ask you about what you're thinking about for your roadmap, 6, 12 months down the road. What's on your mind? Have you got, drafts of new stories for Katya in those drawers behind you for people watching, or how does it work from your sort of planning process?
yes, sure. Well, I'll deal with the last question first. Yes, we're halfway through the next book, which is Arctic Betrayal, set in the Laptev Sea in the north of Siberia. So she's going to a cold country this time. And also in the drawer is a book that we've written that actually concentrates on the life of Lev, who is a major character in Katya's life as a Russian. And that deals with his time when he was in Berlin. So those two are on the chocks. The Arctic Betrayal will be published Christmas, and we're looking to publish Lev's work probably later on the next year. So that's that. How do we work? We walk in the park every morning about 6:30, which wakes us up. And we create our plots at that stage, and we work out the plot from beginning to end, and we work out the characters from beginning to end, but very, very loosely, so that it allows us to chop and change in terms of tactics, as it were, as we go through the book chapter by chapter. Having done that, that's all put down and kept sacred in the drawer, to be opened every time we come to the computer. Then we walk in the park again, and we go through each day. We work out precisely where we're going to go, what we're going to write. Now, of course, that can in fact go weeks ahead. But sometimes characters get out of kilter. One starts to love a character too much, so they have to be slashed back. But of course, some characters are not developed enough, because characters are important. So we have to do that. And then, of course, the plot line in many ways changes quite considerably in terms of the small plot lines rather than the major plot line. And we have great fun doing that. So that's how we work it. It's huge fun. And I think sometimes people walking past us in the park are quite shocked.
Next time I'm looking at my watch and it's 6:30 a.m., I shall think about international crime and espionage plots being worked out as you walk through the park together. That's wonderful. And last question on the writing process, do you stick to a particular time to write? Do you have to get so many words out a day, or is it more of a free-flowing sort of approach?
No. We write every day. I think it's a discipline for us anyway. I'm certainly not disciplined enough to be able to write whenever I want. I have to sit and write every day. I think we're very lucky working together, because I think that stops the problems of writer's block, because there's always a solution. and those walks are vital because the solutions come. Because I mean, obviously, every now and again one gets into problems, and also because one's been in the business, whereas one can use that background, one must never use the particular. So, the actual secrets must be kept. So that one needs to be very careful about how one writes, because all the books are passed through the MI5, who vet them for being published, so that they make quite sure that there's nothing there that's going to interfere with national security. So, yeah.
That's a proofreader most people don't have, David.
It is so, yes. True.
Very good, very good. Well, look, before we run out of time, I want to ask you two last questions, if I can squeeze them in. The first one is, if there's anything that we haven't touched on, or maybe it's something we have discussed that you want to expand on, that you want to leave our audience with today, any sort of final thoughts? And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to get hold of your books, find out more about your writing, where's the best place to send people to?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's on my social media, David Bickford, CB. I had to put the CB in because there was an actor called David Bickford. So it's David Bickford CB, which is my social media. They'll find it all there. And very welcome, and thank them if they do go. So,
yeah, no problem. They can also, I know the website is davidbickford.co.uk for people who want to find out a little bit more about the books too. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, yes. What would I like to leave? I think you touched on the multiplicity of problems that we're all facing at the moment, and they range from Russia and Ukraine, and where we must support Ukraine, down to the problems with Hamas, Israel, and I think that we need to remember that there's a balance of rights between everybody, and if we go onto social media and talk about our rights, I think we need to understand that there are other people's rights as well, and that balance needs to be kept. Very, very important. The agencies do it, and they're working in the most secret world of all. They're working in the most dangerous world of all. And I think if they can understand a balance of rights, I think so too can the rest of us.
That's a great note to end on. I love everything that you've said. I love the balance of rights. I love the word that you used earlier on, which was integrity being the most important. And I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening to us today here on the Global Discussion. Thanks to all our audience and supporters around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything that I need you to do to help support the show. And of course, go and check out the excellent writing. It really is international crime and espionage at its very best. Go over and check out everything that David Bickford's involved in. But I do want to ask you to join me back here for some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers, just like David. David, it's been my pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. It's been really interesting, and thank you so much for having me.